So today we're going to go on a little field trip, class. We're blessed since we moved into paradise, and we didn't think this was going to be possible, but we actually live right across the road from a lake. So instead of doing my silence and solitude exercise indoors today, I have permission from my boss, of course, to take it across the street so you can see the beautiful place where I get to meditate. And then the camera will be going off because it's just me and God. Hi friends, welcome to day 5 of 12 days in the disciplines, and today marks somewhat of a transition because we're moving from the inner disciplines to the outer disciplines as Foster classifies them. And today we're going to be diving into a discipline that really a lot of us are dabbling in right now already because we've been forced into this self-isolation or social distancing. So solitude isn't a question of whether we're going to spend time alone, but it's a matter of what we're going to do with that time. And Richard Foster is so instructive when it comes to this concept. He says loneliness is inner emptiness. Solitude is inner fulfillment. Can I say that one more time? Loneliness is inner emptiness. Solitude is inner fulfillment. Solitude is more state of mind and heart than it is a place. And he says we can practice solitude anywhere and everywhere, but we need longer periods to build up muscle memory. Now, an excellent example of this is found in the Gospels, and all over the place you're going to read this. Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. That specific quote is Luke 5:16. Now, solitude and fellowship are both disciplines, and they're kind of like stretch disciplines. They run on a continuum. Solitude is best when it's balanced by fellowship. Fellowship is best when it's balanced by solitude. And there's something of this also in fasting and feasting that I didn't get to touch on in my last video. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says, one who wants fellowship without solitude plunges into the void of words and feelings, and one who seeks solitude without fellowship perishes in the abyss of vanity, self-infatuation, and despair. Disciplines are practice for all of life. It's something like during this time of social distancing, I've been learning classical piano again, and to be honest with you, my fingers just don't remember how to do a lot of the things that they could do back when I was 20. So I've spent a lot of time practicing just scales and arpeggios. And it took me probably a month to be able to master a piece that I had learned back when I was in my late teens. Silence and solitude enhance our ability to stay silent and to listen, and to be present to other people. So it's kind of like muscle memory for your listening reflexes. It allows you to be more present with people because you don't feel the need to fill the space with conversation. Now, this practice I found is incredibly difficult to do when we're gathered. I've attempted this as a worship leader at times in my home churches, and it always feels a little bit uncomfortable when we take 2 or 3 minutes to just be silent and to wait on God. It doesn't come naturally to us. I remember back in one of my old youth groups, I took them on kind of a pilgrimage, and we actually took a road trip with some other leaders to a place where we could practice silence and solitude. And we instructed the teens very specifically, you're not to use your phones, you're to walk a certain distance apart, you're not to talk to each other. This whole thing is about you being silent, listening to your soul and listening to the Spirit. And at the end of this hike, I think it was about 45 minutes, we read a scripture, and then we walked back down the other side again. And the youth said it was the hardest 45 minutes of their lives. Silence and solitude is not easy. So when you're beginning to practice this, again, start at your own pace. Silence and solitude can be practiced anywhere from a few minutes on a car trip to an entire day or a weekend if you wanted to take a retreat and just be quiet and quiet your soul before God. Now, going a whole day or a weekend without speaking, just being in a place where you're alone and isolated, is very spiritually beneficial, but there's some things you should be aware of that might come to the surface. When I was in my mid-20s, I just finished Bible college, and I was about 2 years of working at Tim Hortons and waiting by a phone for a church to call me. It was so discouraging and such a practice in patience on the call of God in my life. And during that time, I would rollerblade away for a day, and I would go to the beach, and I would do this practice of silence and solitude. And again, it was a time for me to connect, listen to my soul, process my feelings, listen for the voice of the Holy Spirit, that still small voice. But there was a point that came during this journey when I experienced something that I read later as being called the dark night of the soul. And during these times, it's almost like your emotions and your mental faculties are not connecting with God the way that you're used to. And during a time of extended isolation, this can happen especially because you're in that place where you're focused on that one thing. And as Pentecostals, when we're not having an emotional experience of the presence of God, sometimes it can feel like the presence of God isn't with us at all. So there was a season I went through during these 2 years where I wasn't connecting with God emotionally at all. I would go to pray and it would feel like my prayers were hitting the ceiling. I would take these days of silence and solitude and I'd be listening a lot to my soul and not hearing a lot from God. So just be aware that if this happens, it's perfectly normal in our Christian walk. And often actually going through places of wilderness like that can give us a deeper appreciation when we do have those moments of delight and joy and emotional response in the presence of God. Solitude is also a door to some of the other disciplines. So you're going to bounce back when you're doing solitude, silence and solitude, to prayer and to meditation. You can combine it with fasting if you wanted to do that as well. Today's practice for me actually did not start well at all. I went outside improperly prepared for the weather and my ears were freezing off the entire time I was outside. And on top of that, trying to practice this discipline with an awareness that I was going to come back and talk about it again was really distracting for me. So for the first probably 20 minutes of my walk, I was just thinking about what I was going to say and thinking what's going to happen if I don't have some sort of experience to talk about when I come back. What's just happened? I've just gone for a walk. And just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with if you go out for silence and solitude and you just go for a walk, or you just spend time alone journaling and reflecting. There is no distinct separation between the physical and the spiritual. All of life is spiritual, and all discipline is spiritual discipline. Even when we're doing things like physical exercise, it's good for our body, our mind, and our soul. So here I was in the midst of my practice. Honestly, I had a little moment of self-pity. I was like, I came to really hear from God. I came to have something to say to the people who I'm practicing with, and I'm not going to have anything to say. And about 5 minutes later, I just had this awareness of the presence of God that filled my senses. It's even hard kind of to talk about in a setting like this because there's more going on than what you're processing with your mind. But I heard the brook and the waves lapping and the birds singing and the wind rustling through the trees. It was kind of like how great thou art moment. And I just felt God saying so profoundly, all of this is happening without you. And it wasn't one of those discouraging, woe is me, I don't have a purpose moments. It was a terrifically liberating, you don't have to be in control of the whole world, and actually without you things are going just fine moment. Now in Formission, going through this season, sometimes it feels like, where are we going next? How are we going to talk about big picture items with the denomination when people are social distancing and we're really just worried about getting our churches online and surviving financially and helping our people to be equipped to live outside of the walls. And this whole thought that God is actually controlling the gravity and that my family is home and they're doing school without me, and that there are Christians who are spiritually growing without me, and there are pastors who are leading and doing a fantastic job without ever hearing about Formission. This was just such a liberating thought for me. And forgive me if you're a spiritually inquisitive person, you're not here as a follower of Jesus. This might sound crazy, but during this moment of awareness, I was asking God kind of, when should I get moving again? And there was this seagull that started squawking. And I mean, it was just this horrid grating sound, just in dissonance with everything else that was going on around me. And I was just kind of in my mind saying, would you just stop that incessant squawking? And I looked over and I promise you, the seagull looked right at me, popped its beak into the ice, pulled at a fish, and flew away. And it's almost like he was saying to me, like God was speaking to me through this seagull saying, look, the world will run just fine without you. Somebody in one of our discussion groups already this week talked about how the discipline of study doesn't come naturally to them, and especially the part about reading books. And I commented back that sometimes the best books we can read are the books we read in nature. And I think such is the case today when I was practicing silence and solitude. God was able to break through to my soul in a way through nature that I hadn't been open to that kind of grace when I had been reading it in books. So I hope this practice of silence and solitude is good for your soul. I hope you do get some good physical exercise if you decide to go the walking route. Again, this can be done sitting at a desk. This can be done driving in a car. You don't have to go out in nature, but for me and my soul, it works best when I do it in nature, at least at punctuated parts if I'm doing a retreat. Until we gather again, grace and peace.